What is good, Playmakers Corner listeners here? Welcome back to the Playmakers Corner podcast. I'm going to be your host for this episode, Kodey Stauffer, and we have a set of previews for y'all here where we are going to talk about teams in Colorado high school tackle football, talk about how they did last season, some of the storylines surrounding that squad, look at some of the players who have either transferred, moved, or graduated, and how that production is going to potentially be replaced by incoming or returning playmakers from last season. Take a look at the schedule and project their win total heading into this 2024 fall season. That's kind of the rundown there, and we're going to just go ahead and jump right into it here. The first team on today's episode going to be the Chatfield Chargers. Last season, the Chargers ran into some unfortunate punishments that took away their first 3 games, and from having a chance of being wins, I know that they still went 1-2 in that stretch, but nonetheless, a good margin of victory in that very first game here, and then also took away one of their best weapons for the postseason, but they stayed winning through the middle of the season, ripping off 5 straight wins in the middle, beating Thunder Ridge, Dakota Ridge, A West during their homecoming, Pomona and Lakewood, before losing to RV and L West, earning like a 14 or 11 seed, something like that heading into the playoffs. But this was honestly perfect for them as they caught fire, getting revenge on Cherokee Trail in a clobbering win, and then pulling off a massive upset, maybe the upset of the year, against Arapahoe in overtime, and rode that emotion to a win over Grandview in a wild 37-28 shootout, but the magic ran out against the eventual state champs, Littleton West, in the semis there. And so some of the players that made last season possible here include the likes of dynamic athlete Jake Jones. He graduates after a senior year of going for over 3,000 combined yards, throwing for 2,368 and 23 scores while running for another 17 and being a huge catalyst for their deep playoff run and a multiple-time Playmaker of the Week winner over the course of his career, being an awesome dual threat here on the 5A level. You also lose Landon Mueller here. He ran for 616 yards and 6 scores, and some of the other senior weapons included top 5 senior Drew Rollman, 43 receptions and 13 touchdowns, making more receiving scores than everyone else combined. And if you include some of the other receiving yards here, then you got to account for Mueller's 224, Micah Lumpkin, who had 437 receiving yards and 2 scores in just 6 games. So those are some of the weapons at the skill positions. And then in the trenches, Declan Scorgem, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, Declan, graduates, and then another pair of 230-plus pound seniors in Lucas and Chris here, listed as linemen. You also, on the defensive side, lose Avery DeWeese here. That's a tough loss for this defense after being near the top in TFLs and notching another 9 hurries from the linebacker position. The secondary takes some massive hits with the graduation of Goose Shelp, who led the team with 5 interceptions, as well as CSU commit Dagan Myers, who is also a threat on special teams, taking away a couple of X factors at corner. Throw in safety Ben Weber, who had 2 interceptions himself and 2 fumble recoveries, and even quality depth like Finnefrock, who had 6 pass breakups. Graduates leave a ton of snaps here in the secondary here. But let's talk about some of the playmakers that we're going to keep an eye out for coming into this fall season. One of those, there's still going to be a Rollman on this offense, as they do bring back Drew Rollman's younger brother, Will Rollman. Shout out Drew for taking time to do an interview with us, and he definitely plugged his young bro here. So go ahead and listen to that interview. Just literally look up Drew Rollman, Playmakers Corner, and you will definitely find that interview. He was an awesome guest here, but I digress a little bit. Sorry, Will, don't mean to let Drew take up some of your spotlight still, but he'll make a name for himself this year. I mean, he's heading into his junior year listed at 6'5" and over 200 pounds, so that should be a matchup nightmare for any opposing defense. You also get Corey Balls returned to the field, who will help whoever's declared the next starter at QB, following a season where he scored 5 times and went for over 600 yards. And then one of the biggest X factors and also one of the biggest what ifs in state as of right now is Brock Narva, who, when healthy, is one of the best athletes in the state. He was a part of that 4A championship squad. And if he can just stay on the field, they can be a threat to make noise in the playoffs again. But that has been a big if, especially following last season where he just missed a ton of time due to injury. And if he can play, he's somebody who can really play the receiver or running back position, as well as defensively being a great cornerback and safety. So hopefully he can be healthy here. We really like his game. We really like to watch him play here at the podcast. And additionally, for his sake, just to get some snaps and to put some respect on his name. Now, even with Brock out, there was another Narva still making noise here. That's Reed Narva, on the other hand. He played 14 games last season and notched 105 tackles with 6 for loss and 2 interceptions being the cherry on top. You also bring back Logan Kundrig, who is an absolute lunatic maniac in the tackling department, while also picking off a pass and logging some sacks as well. He finished the season with 99 solo tackles and 11 TFLs. Caleb Espinosa was the running mate here with 88 solo and a team-high 16 tackles for loss. You also bring back Cody Wittig here, responsible for about 100 tackles total, while leading in sacks with 5 and TFLs at 13.5. You also bring back rising junior Nate Helms. Should have his best chance to really get some snaps and have a chance to show what he showed as a middle schooler and be a game wrecker at linebacker or edge, depending on his size heading into this season. At the quarterback position, going to project here that Cash Williams is poised to come in and start as a sophomore. Granted, I'm not sure what the upperclassman Sitch might look like, but he made our watch list, and I think his upside can still help Chatfield win some games, albeit probably with a few growing pains along the way. But if that is the case, there is another freshman from last year in Jaden Zeller, who was a newcomer of the year candidate, who comes back at wide receiver, looking to carry over that same momentum and take that X factor one step further and hopefully build some chemistry with somebody in the same graduating class. You also bring back Jesse Wolf and Cooper Wicks, who are both next-level guys who will be tasked with keeping Cash upright and paving roads for tailbacks and leading their fellow linemen to replace some production from last season. So those are a lot of the returning pieces. Obviously, there's going to be some as well, but a lot of these guys are watch list guys or high numbers guys here that I mentioned. And let's go ahead and take a look at their upcoming season here. They do start off at home with the Chatfield versus Dakota Ridge rivalry in the very first week. I actually really like that they moved this to earlier in the season personally, as you know, it allows them to get into their 5A schedule a lot sooner. So I'm going to go ahead and say that Chatfield, despite graduating a lot of big playmakers, does win this one, as Dakota Ridge is also experiencing some similar graduation at other key positions. So I'm going to say Chatfield starts off here 1-0. And then they face off against Horizon. That should be a win. Their third game of the season. This is going to be a really big game. It's an interconference game here between Eagle Crest and Chatfield here. A big matchup from the 5A Centennial and 5A Metro League here. I am going to favor Eagle Crest. This offense here for Chatfield is going to be a little bit younger versus this Eagle Crest squad that returns a ton of experience on both sides of the ball. I think that the defense is going to be a little bit of a challenge for the Chatfield offense. And then Eagle Crest here, just returning some continuity at some important positions. I think that they'll be a little bit more ready earlier here in the season to win this game than Chatfield will be. I'm not saying that Chatfield can't win this game, but that's just currently my projection at this point. In week 4, they face Brighton. Now, this Brighton team is going to be pretty talented this year. I'm going to talk about them a little bit later down this episode here. But for now, I do favor Chatfield to win this game. It is at home, and I do think that, you know, their talent and depth, more specifically, is better than Brighton's. And so I'm going to project Chatfield to win this game. I'm going to project kind of the same thing against Douglas County. I know Douglas County is going to be able to host this game. I know that that's an awesome stadium to play at, and their fans really do show out there typically. But I do think, like I said, Chatfield just a little bit more deep at more positions here. And so before league play, I have Chatfield going 4-1 here. They should not, I don't really think they should do worse than that. there's a world where they only win 3 of these games, but definitely no less than that. Now, heading into league play, they do start off at home versus Rowson Valley. I do think that they get their get back from their regular season matchup last season, and I do think that they win this game. They then play Denver East. They do have the benefit of this game being at home. Very interesting game here. Denver East bringing back a lot of key pieces. I talked about them in last episode. That's episode 383, which, by the way, keep listening to the previews that come out following this and listen to the ones that come out before this if you want to hear about some of the other teams that maybe aren't on this episode. But to bring it back to Chatfield versus Denver East returning a lot of studs on the defensive side of the ball. It kind of depends on where this offense is. I do think that this is a very winnable game for Chatfield here, but this one is definitely more of a toss-up than some of the other contests on here. Like Denver South, I think that they win against Denver South here. Versus Arvada West, this team is going to want revenge for last season, following their homecoming being spoiled by Chatfield in such a wild way. So, while I think this game could potentially go either way, Arvada West is still going to be a pretty junior-heavy team versus this defense for Chatfield that is going to have some serious senior impact. So another one that could flip either way, but for now, I'm favoring Chatfield. And then they end the season at Littleton West. I think that Littleton West wins that, and I'll talk about them next here. But all in all, Chatfield, I say even if they lose every single one of these toss-ups, which just doesn't happen, I mean, I still think that they win 7 games here, if I'm being completely honest. Or, let's say at worst they win 6, but at best I think that they win 9 games. Overall, I'm going to have them going 8-2 here. Is going to be my projected record for the Chargers here. But with a window of wins anywhere between 6 to 9, they're still going to be a playoff team this season and one that's going to push a lot of teams and compete. Now on to last year's state championship. We're going to talk about Littleton West. Columbine, for those who don't know, I said they could go 10-0 with 9-1 as the worst case scenario, and that was true, and they kept rolling through the postseason, eventually winning state and capping off an undefeated season. They do lose some talent at their skill positions, like lead ball carriers Josh Schneider and Mason Moreno, both graduating, taking nearly 3,000 combined yards and 40 rushing scores with them as both backs head just a little northwest of Littleton to School of Mines. Starting QB, in quotes here, Reeve Holiday graduates after not turning the ball over a lot in his 70 passing attempts. On the line, they graduate number 52, Mason Crook, Carlos Mendoza, Andrew Osola, and listed tight end Spencer Howell, 6'4", 200 pounds. So just some size and experience there. Defensively, they lose the heart and soul of this defense, James Sillison, who is far and above the leading tackler in solos with 92 of his 129 total being on his lonesome, while also running the ball when necessary and breaking up a few passes, but mainly leading this team in forced fumbles being his claim to fame here and tying for second on the team in sacks. So just a very versatile middle linebacker, very good kid who I'm going to wish a ton of luck on the next level. He was second to only Hunter Hamilton, who had 7 sacks last season at defensive end and recorded a total of 55 tackles, not to mention leading in receiving touchdowns with 5 last season at the tight end position. You also lose Alan Pham and Nico Zaharis here. Both had 6 sacks themselves and were shortly followed with Spencer Howell and Carlos Mendoza both having 4 sacks themselves. Overall, the Rebels lose 81% of their sacks and their top 11 tacklers to graduation, 730 total tackles to be exact, meaning there are some serious shoes to be filled of the names listed in the previous section. I'm talking about Miranda with 98, Zaharis with 84, Ryder Williams, who was 4th in tackles, but the leader in interceptions with 3, and was accompanied in the secondary with Josh Schneider, who was a difference maker on that side of the ball as well. And yet, I don't seem panicked, and you heard about my prediction in the very last segment. So what's the deal with this prediction? Well, let's talk about some of the players that they're returning and just talk about kind of the team that they are and how that feeds in. And so some pillars of last season's run game return with the class of 25. Peyton Burkar coming back, 6'3", 250 pounds. DJ Ironshell, 6'1", 265 pounds. Class of 27, Joseph Russman, 6'1", 265 pounds. They also have size in Dom Swait, 6'4", 285 pounds. Julian Bremigan, 6'2", 245 pounds. Vincent Chavez, 5'11", 240 pounds. Michael Veith, 6 foot, 215 pounds. Josiah Ernest, class of 27, 6'1", 230 pounds. And incoming junior Owen Walter, who got snaps at center last season, 6'2", 280 pounds. This team is going to continue to just be bigger up front, and they're going to win with this scheme that they run here, the wing tee. No one could stop it last season. Really an indictment on the defensive coordinators here on the 5A level. But, I mean, when you build a team around this size up front, you're going to find success running the scheme almost no matter who's getting the ball, especially when you have speedy guys like Snyder and good athletes like Moreno finding these holes and punishing defenses with them. And so this season, while they do lose some of their starting linemen for last year, I mean, this is all that they rep. You only have to learn, like, I don't know, at most 15 plays, and then if you count them left to right, 30. So once you get that movement down, you should be good to go, honestly, in this squad. And that's going to kill a lot of teams here in 5A. They're going to just kill them and grind them to an absolute dust and win games that way. So, and, that's just going to kind of be the story here. Defensively, this team is going to be very fresh. I know that they lose a ton of experience on defense, but when your offense is, when your offense is taking their time and just getting 5 or 6 yards at a time, occasionally ripping off some big plays, the defense is going to be fresh all game, and so they're going to be able to play at 105, 110% on every single snap without getting tired here. And so you have some guys who are going to capitalize off of that, like Will Monroe, along with Julian Bremigan, who filled the void at pass rush after they combined for 5 sacks last season. And then Ernest, as a freshman, got in there a little bit last season and will have a bigger role this season. So that size is going to impact both sides of the ball, and they're going to be very fresh depending on how this offensive line rotation looks. But you also have the premier playmaker of this team, two-way stud, James Basinger here, who on defense recorded 3 interceptions and 4 pass breakups with great instincts in the pass game and 33 total tackles. Expect those numbers to take a jump. And offensively, he was 3rd in rushing and 2nd in receiving for a little over 700 cumulative yards and 10 total touchdowns. He's a versatile athlete who will be tasked with lead back duties, and I think that they're probably going to complement him with sophomore Mark Snyder. I think that's Josh Snyder's younger brother, if I had to guess, who got just over 200 yards in limited action last season here. But, I think that obviously with the workload and working in this system and just repping those plays over and over again, that's going to be very successful for Snyder and Littleton West here. Now, this team, I'm projecting them to just go 10-0 here off rip, and I'm going to go ahead and go through this schedule and talk about teams that they might lose to. But, just with that size that they're returning up front and with the way that they're going to play keep away against other great offenses, it's going to be hard to beat this team. They start off against Thunder Ridge. This is going to be a tough game to watch if you are a Thunder Ridge fan, in my opinion, as respectfully as I can say that. At Legend, this is probably one of the better teams that Littleton West is going to face. I say that Legend has a chance, especially with an offense where they run the ball a lot themselves, hopefully grinding down the defense from their side of the football, and it's in Parker. So that is a game that they definitely could lose, but I'm still favoring the defending state champs to win. Fossil Ridge, Vistal Ridge, not literally Mesa Ridge, Heritage. I think that they go 3-0 here. 2 of these are 4A teams, and one of them is a 5A team here. Interesting scheduling here, but that's going to be tough for those squads, and good for West here. At Denver East, I do think that they win this game. Denver East does return some size up front, to be fair, on this Saturday afternoon game. So Denver East could make this interesting. They also bring back their lead back as well. So sometimes you kind of got to fight fire with fire here. If they play keep away, then you probably also play keep away. Or if they can open up the air attack and put up a couple of quick scores, that seems to have been the recipe anytime that the Rebels have lost over the past few years. Another team just scores really fast and quickly and forces the Rebels to play catch up, and that's not a position that they're necessarily as successful in with this scheme. Now, they play Arvada West. Arvada West, I talked about it last episode. They're returning a ton of talent. A lot of it's juniors, and I think that size-wise, L West is just a little bit bigger here. Versus Ralston Valley, they're going to win this game. They're going to beat Denver South. And like I said, for Chatfield, there's a world where Chatfield wins this, but I have L West favored. At absolute worst, I guess you could make the argument that they only win 7 games. But, I think a more accurate window of wins is 8 to 10, and I am still projecting them to go 10-0, partially because I just don't want to hear it if they do any worse than that. But, or if they do better than my projection. But at the same time, they're just so large, and they build this team to run this offense, and, I think that is important to understand on why it is the most successful wing tee in the state. And, they have some big guys who come through. They want to win a lot of football games, and they do exactly that running this system. Now we're going to head north to Brighton to talk about the Bulldogs. Last year, I had them projected in a window of wins of 1 to 4, and they went above the bar, going 500 with some impressive wins, like an 8-point win over Vista Peak Prep, a 4-point win over Fossil Ridge at home, and then taking care of business against Pooter before outdueling opposing offenses in crazy shootouts like Prairie View and Range View, scoring 56 and 60 respectively to pull out those wins. And their defense, on the other hand, is kind of the root cause of a lot of these losses last year, allowing 34.8 points per game in losses in the regular season, and once again allowing a 50-burger in their loss to Legend in the playoffs. Now, the graduating seniors line here is pretty thin, with the biggest contributor, Isaiah Shep, who got a ton of touches at tailback, garnering 104 carries in 8 games for 663 yards, and 1 score shy of 10 rushing touchdowns while contributing 54 tackles on defense. Now, returning outside of Shep, this offense should be in prime position to continue to make noise next year, with incoming senior Blake George popping off his junior year, scoring 25 touchdowns and having nearly 2,000 yards between passing and rushing. And not only was George high volume out of the backfield, but the Dogs had 2 other running backs in class of 25, Jeremiah Ramos, and class of 26, Tate Tompkins, who both ran for over 400 yards and a 4-piece of scores each. You also bring back Dom Schroeder, the leading receiver last year with 201 yards and 4 scores, and combine that with 6'3" potential tight end target Parker Dottie here, who could provide a much-needed passing threat over the middle. Dottie, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, will look to be a problem on the defensive side as well, being a Dungeon Fam DE. Now, this defense, to be fair, was mostly juniors last year, headlined by Cale Helwig, 98 total tackles, finishing ahead of Schroeder, Watkins, Dowdy, who all had, about 50-ish tackles, and Cale had about 30 more tackles than any of those dogs. You also bring back Dominic Petrocco here, who might have only been a freshman, but still ended up in the rotation and recording 24 total tackles. You bring back Zach Weber as well, who had 3 interceptions, leading this defense and giving some much-provided turnovers for a unit that desperately needed some. And offensively in the trenches, you're returning watch list tackle Cooper Vance, who should anchor this line. Now, looking ahead to this schedule here, it's not going to be easy here for Brighton, but I do think that they scheduled pretty well out of league to brace themselves for league and brace themselves to make some noise in league as well. And this league, just know I'm only covering 2 of these squads. You will have to wait for Gideon's season preview to hear about some of the other ones. Now, they start off against Erie. This is very interesting, as this will be a homecoming for Erie's coach here, and the first time that I think he will have coached against Brighton since coaching them prior a few years ago here. I do think this is a tough way to start the season. I do have Erie favored. Go ahead and listen to my season preview of Erie here from a few episodes ago. But Erie should probably win this game, even though Brighton is at home. They then play at Douglas County. This is a very interesting football game here, one that I think could go either way. I think Douglas County has some interesting rising talent, and you will hear their preview, I want to say from Gino V. Hill. But importantly here, I do think that this could be a winnable game. I think especially if this gets into a shootout, that does favor Brighton here. One that could go either way, but I have Brighton favored. I also have Brighton favored against Golden here in week 3 before I do have them not favored against Chatfield. Go ahead and jump back to the very first segment of this episode if you want an explanation on that. And then versus Bear Creek, they should win this game. So I have them going 2-3 or 3-2, kind of hovering around that 500 mark before they head into league play, where they should be able to string some wins together here. I actually think following Bear Creek, they could find themselves in a 3-0 run here against the likes of Rocky Mountain and Prairie View High School. They do face Prairie View on the road, so that is one advantage that Prairie View has here. And then they face Fairview here at home. I'm going to talk about Fairview up next. This is going to be a very, very interesting game. I think that Fairview, high-end talent-wise, might be a little bit more put together. But as far as cohesiveness goes, I think that Brighton is probably the more cohesive team. At this point in the season, it'll be interesting to tell. Fairview, we will know who they are by this point in the season. I'm going to actually favor Brighton to pull off this win at home. I do think that Fairview is going to score a ton of points. I think that this game ends with both teams scoring probably over 30, honestly. But I have Brighton pulling off an upset at this point because I think Fairview will, for the most part, I think, have a better record to this point. And I think that this will be an upset for Brighton. It just seems like the type of game that they can steal at home against Fairview here. They then close the season at Fort Collins and versus Fossil Ridge here. Both of those squads are returning a lot of high-end talent, but I do think that Brighton here could make necessary adjustments to win both these games. I don't think that they go worse than 1-1 in these games at worst here. So even if I give them the worst-case scenario of 2-3 out of league, I think that they go 3-2 in league, even if they do lose to Fairview here. And so that would put them at 5-5 at worst, honestly. But at best, I think that this could be a 7-win team, honestly. I think there's a couple of games that you just don't get here. But I do kind of have them leaning towards that 7-3 projected record. I think that they take that step forward on defense here. And I think that offensively, you kind of already know what you're going to get with how many points this squad scored last season. And yeah, I think that this is a 7-3 win for Brighton. And I think that they, kind of channel this Brighton excellence that we've come to expect from them more so on the 4A level and finally take that big boy step here on the 5A level. Keeping the ball rolling here in this league, we are going to talk about the Fairview Knights. And last year was kind of a crazy season here. After a lightning hot start, they scored over 90 points in the first 2 games with Rowan Reisner running this offense. And then in week 3, kind of, I don't know, maybe an omen of sorts here, as Fairview was in the driver's seat against Valor, I want to say in the third quarter, up by 3 scores, and somehow managed to blow a massive lead here to lose 29-28. That kind of put a damper on the vibes and how much we thought they could achieve before Phenom QB Beckham Kritza here came back and helped the Knights go undefeated for the rest of the season. To be fair, I think that they probably would have done that regardless, even with Rowan here. But they do beat opponents like Douglas County, a playoff team, Poudre High School, Boulder, Fort Collins High School, Fossil Ridge High School, and Rocky Mountain. The Knights, however, once they reached the first round of the playoffs, had no answers for top 5 running back Matthias Price and the Fountain Fort Carson Trojans, as the Trojans had their way with Fairview in Boulder, 42-14 here. They were predicted to go 9-1 with a window of wins of 7-9, and they went exactly 9-1, losing that game to Valor here. And yeah, as far as graduated seniors, I know that he's not graduating, but the Penn State commit Beckham Kritza is on the move again out of state. opening up the quarterback position once more. And then they do lose Rowan Reisner to graduation here, who will not be there to take the steed as he does graduate, having manned the station for plenty of starts himself over the past couple years. They also lose a few weapons on the offense, most notably probably Jace Hines, 1,079 all-purpose yards, 12 total touchdowns. You also lose Ben Hawley, who had 4 rushing and 4 receiving touchdowns, as well as 900 all-purpose yards, both taking chunks out of the passing game and ground game here. You also lose Walker Hungate here as the only senior with over 40 tackles, and Cole Mathis, who walks across the stage on defense with 4 interceptions and 4 pass deflections here. Now, defensively is where the majority of the talent does return. However, you get Ryder Villarreal and Brock Kolstad at linebacker, one of the more dangerous duos over the middle, I think, who should be solid and both have high upside and D1 potential, and they will be filling lanes and breaking up passes. You also bring back slot corner Wyatt Keegan, who came in and made tackles as well as 3 interceptions, 3 fumble recoveries, and led the team with 7 pass breakups. You also bring back Torrey Davis here, who collected 4 interceptions as a sophomore and recovered a fumble as well, being one of the biggest factors in turnovers. Up in the defensive trenches, you do get Keegan Field Gordon, who's a big return and should see his stock rise with a big senior season, clogging up some of these running lanes. All in all, the Knights have 12 out of 14 leading tacklers returning. And at quarterback, we took a look at his film and decided that he does make the watch list. That is Jet Howard here, who's next in line. Limited action on varsity. He was successful and ran the system well the past few years on the JV level, and does have the benefit of Jordan Rutschel here, one of the best offensive athletes in the state, scoring through ground and air basically at will, making anyone's life easier who is under center as he looks to repeat his status on our list of all PMC as well as awards and whatnot here. So, this Fairview team, they're going to score. They're going to, unfortunately, run a multiple offense. When they run the spread, it's an offense that teams just aren't used to defending here in the state of Colorado, unfortunately, and it works to great success. And then when they go to their I almost want to call it the skinny wing tee, just without as much size or proficiency running it, it becomes a little bit easier to defend, but in the red zone has found success, unfortunately, as we just don't know how to coach defenses here in the Box State. But I digress a little bit. I'll get off my soapbox and talk about their season where they start off against Legacy High School. Now, I think that they could push this squad, but I do think this early in the season, that is going to be a loss here. They then go on the road to Arvada West. I do actually have Arvada West favored this early in the season with how many snaps they got last year, and I think that defensively, this team is very equipped and athletic enough to handle this Fairview offense in its earliest iteration. Now, week 3, this is the battle for Boulder here. I do have Fairview favored. Maybe not in the same clobbering fashion that they have conducted themselves in this game over the past few years. However, I do think that they should still be favored and win this game. They then play Monarch at Monarch. That should be a win. And then versus Smoky Hill, this should be a win. So probably 3-2 heading into league play against Prairie View. This actually could be a pretty good game, but with it being at home, I will take the Knights in this one. Versus Fort Collins, I think that this one could go either way. I think talent-wise, Fort Collins has some size up front to really push this team around. And I think that Fort Collins in a shootout could actually win this game, honestly. Could go either way, but I'm going to currently favor Fort Collins. At Brighton, I do think that, they should have the better record at this point. Fairview, that is, with a 4-3, but I do think that this could plummet them to 500. They then face Fossil Ridge at home and then go against Rocky Mountain. Fossil Ridge is also a team returning some talent, and Fairview, I don't know if they're going to be able to keep up this year, but they could still win this game. And then at Rocky Mountain, look, a lot of these games could go back and forth. It just depends on how Jet Howard looks in a varsity setting. I still have confidence in him, and I still think that this team could be a playoff team, and I don't think that they win any less than 5 games. I think anything under 500 is a disappointing season, but at the same time, just with their program history and some of the games that they're known to drop and just some of the talent that they're losing on the offensive side of the ball, I don't think that they win. I think in the best case scenario, if they do go undefeated in league, which is a possibility, they could win 8 games. So that's a window of wins between 5 and 8 for this season here. But I want to say that their projection here for their record, I mean, I don't think that they go, I don't know if they have a losing record in league. I don't think that they go 2-3. But if they go 3-2 and 3-2, I'm going to say that this team is probably a 6-4 squad for this season. Now, I did say on the high end they could win 8, so don't come after me, Boulder community. You know that we've made it out to a Fairview game basically every year of the pod, and we love going to that stadium. But this will be a challenging season for them, and we will just see how it goes. And with that, that's going to be the last team that I actually talk about on the 5A level. Be sure to double back, listen to my other previews talking about other 5A teams. But we make our way into 4A here, talking about the Frederick Warriors, who, yes, were in 3A last season here. And in 3A, they kind of stumbled out the gate with an 0-3 start, losing to the eventual state champs in Holy Family 28-8, and then a 7-point loss to 4A Monarch, and then losing to Nebraska's Scottsbluff before finally bouncing back and crushing Silver Creek on the 4A level by 41 points, beating Fort Morgan by 11 points, and Niwot with another 40-burger to bring them back to 500. This would predate their last regular season loss of the season here to Riverdale Ridge, where they lose by 1 point, but they won some close competitive games down the stretch against the likes of Denver North, 41-36, Meade, 23-17, and then a big win over G-Dub here before losing to eventual state runner-up Lutheran High School in the playoffs here. I had a window of wins of 4-6 and projected 5-5. They end up going 6-4, hitting the upper ceiling of that window of wins, but still falling inside of it. As far as seniors that are graduating, you do graduate Tatum Sanders and Kamarly Davey here, who combined for over 400 yards and 10 total touchdowns. Kamarly here led the team in sacks with 5 of those, as well as TFLs at 12. Now, they do return a ton of talent as they head into 4A here. Senior gunslinger Gavin Ishmael brings an arm and a competitiveness to this program that will keep them afloat even on the 4A level. With a lot of weapons coming back, he will look to push the ball downfield and pick up first downs with his legs. He ran for over 800 yards, and then lead back Tristan Dean went for 341, who also returns. As far as receiving goes, you do get G's Real Palma, who almost eclipsed 1,000 yards and 8 scores. And then at the tight end position, a big mismatch in Burke Eisman, who is a size and strength monster, who is just a couple yards shy of 600, but had 14 scores, being an almost unstoppable threat in the red zone. You also have Sony Del Pizzo, who is good for 464 yards as only a sophomore. And defensively, their top tackler was only a sophomore with Ross. He had 105 tackles, and the next 9 out of 10 tackles all return. We're looking at a Taven Haggerty, who had 88 and 4 for loss. Wesley Walker, who had 84 total tackles, 9 for loss, and 4 sacks to go with 9 hurries to continue the pass rush here. Braden Stark, who almost had 80, and the secondary returns all 5 interceptions. What does that mean for this squad as far as their window of wins here? Now, to open up the season for the Warriors here, it is Broomfield at home. I think that game, they're probably not favored in. I probably am leaning Broomfield. They then have Meade. Meade is going to be a good team on the 3A level this year. I think that's something to account for, but I think this early in the season, I think that Frederick could repeat that success that they had last year, as Meade will still be looking for some of those guys to make that leap versus Frederick had the guys who made that leap last season. At least this early in the season, I think it kind of favors Frederick. They then have Skyline at home. I think that they win this game before going to Montbello. Now, Montbello is a first-year varsity program. They did play JV games last year. So this will be a very good and interesting matchup. I think it could go either way. I think that Montbello's athletes are pretty solid, but I'm going to trust the varsity experience of this Frederick offense and defense to help them win this initial game. They then have Thornton High School at home. I think that they should win this game. So We're looking at worst, probably 3-2, but probably 4-1 heading into league. Their first league game being against Loveland here. Loveland does graduate a handful of contributors here, but they will also have some solid guys returning. I think that overall, this game definitely favors Loveland being at home and being against this squad that, was prone to making some mistakes down the stretch of games last season. That's kind of Loveland's brand, is waiting for you to make that mistake and not letting you amend it. So I think that this favors Loveland, but I do think that for the rest of this league, these are very winnable games. At home versus Silver Creek, at Pooter versus Monarch, at Greeley West. I mean, they could maybe lose this Pooter or Monarch game. I don't think that they lose both. So what I'm going to say for Frederick here is at worst, if they go 3-2 outside of league and 3-2 inside of league, they go 6-4, even on the 4A level here. But I do think that this should be a 7-3 season. I don't know where that third loss comes from, but I'll say a window of wins anywhere from 6 to 8. I think that they definitely lose 2 games here, and I'm going to say that they fall smack dab in the middle there at 7-3 for this squad. Now we are on to Monarch, the Coyotes here. Talking about last season, they overcame a devastating injury to their starting quarterback, Asher Ewing, and then survived the Boulder game with a W here, and then persevered with junior quarterback Riley Montemayor here with 3 more wins over the likes of Stanley Lake, Frederick, and Centaurus. They would then lose their way, dropping the next 4 in a row before getting a bounce-back win over Greeley West, and then losing to Silver Creek and getting to play a Golden squad and getting a seat to play Golden and losing big to end their season. But, they had a wow of 6-8, which they kind of underachieved, but they had to bring along a first-year starter in that time. This is not the 6-8 that they were projected to play with, as they were originally supposed to play with Asher Ewing. But I think it was good experience for Riley Montemayor here and for this Monarch squad, looking to continue to make noise this season on the 4A North 1 League. So let's go ahead and talk about this team and some of the players that they're losing. Obviously, Asher Ewing does not get a chance to bounce back, and neither does Brody Gray. Brody Gray rushing for almost 600 yards and 7 scores while catching another 15 passes for 230. They lose leading receiver Owen Mellish here, who notched 699 yards and 3 touchdowns. You also got to replace the production of Rex Muldoon and Will Herzig, the leading tacklers on this team. Muldoon having almost twice as many tackles as Herzig here at 90. You also lose Noah Hunziker and Lucas Holmberg. These 2 guys combined for 15 TFLs, and Noah Hunziker here leading with 5 sacks. And then you lose the 280-pound frame Randy Sievert from the trenches, depth-wise or starter-wise. As far as returning playmakers go, obviously Riley Montemayor here has a chance to continue to finish what was thrust upon him. And in this junior season where he became the surprise starter, he threw for 1,700 yards and had 20 total touchdowns through the air and ground. So I would call that season a success. And now that he has that experience under his belt, I think that he'll be a much better leader and player for it. You also get back Gavin Fagan, who is the leading contributor in all-purpose yards, who comes back with 546 total. And then you also return Archie John, who had over 500 yards. Defensively, this squad also returns John's 49 total tackles between John and Fagan here. And then Gavin on defense had 3 interceptions, which was a team high. And you also bring back Andrew Martin, one of the leading tacklers in the backfield, with 6 TFLs. So looking ahead to this schedule here, this is crazy if this is right. They have 4 straight away games to start. Sorry, I don't think I've seen this either in some time or I can't recall if I've seen this, but they have at Pooter, at Longmont, at Broomfield, and at Centaurus here. I think that at best you go 2-2. I don't know if they beat a Longmont or Broomfield here, but maybe they beat a Pooter, maybe they beat a Centaurus. I don't know. We'll see. And then they're at home versus Fairview. That is probably also a loss, as I talked about in the Fairview segment. And then heading into league here, they do have Boulder High School. This should be a win for them. Versus Loveland, I think this is a loss. Versus Greeley West, I think that this could be a win here. Greeley West not returning a ton of snaps from last season. At Frederick, I think this is a loss. And versus Silver Creek, this could be an interesting game, honestly, but I think that returning Montemayor helps give you an edge in this one. So, looking at this season here, they kind of hover around 500 all season. I think at best, I think there's at least 4 losses on the schedule, honestly. I think at best you could go 6-4. Well, no, I think at best you could go 5-5, honestly. If you are Monarch, I think the schedule's a little bit more treacherous than last year. But if you don't have your ducks in a row, you could do as low as 3-7 here, if I'm being completely honest. Now, I think that they're probably going to fall smack dab in the middle, as I typically like to do for these teams here. And I'm going to say that even though they have a 3 to 5 window of wins officially, I think that they probably go 4-6. Now, they still have a chance to maybe make the playoffs, but I mean, it just depends on how they do in this schedule against some of these more competitive teams. But that is Monarch. Real short segment as far as playmakers that they are both returning and graduating. Moving on to my former stomping grounds of coaching. Going to talk about the Greeley West Spartans here. Look, last year they get that win against Greeley Central 10-7, but unfortunately dropped every other game, including not scoring during the first 3 contests against the likes of Mountain Range, Bear Creek, and Thomas Jefferson. They do finally score against Northridge, but would lose 40+ to just 2 scores to Northridge, Silver Creek, and then Longmont before getting that win and then getting bounced around by Windsor, Monarch, and Erie. Projected window of wins of 0-2, and I said that they would be on the high end of that, going 2-8. Unfortunately, they fall just below my projection, but still in the window of wins of 1-9. And, you know, some of these seniors are guys that I coached on the freshman level, and it's a little bittersweet to see them, you know, graduate and take care of business and also get their chance on the varsity level. Very proud of these guys in this class of 24. The biggest loss is definitely going to be David Lopez, a 2-way starter here at linebacker and running back, capping off a 4-year starting career on the varsity level while getting another 22 carries for 197 yards and 48 tackles. He was imperative to that win for the Spartans against the Wildcats here, and he will be playing college ball and is going to be a good athlete on the next level and is just overall a very good kid. Julian Salas, this kid overcame a lot to eventually win the starting quarterback job, and despite a tough year statistically, he was necessary for that dub over Central. You also got my guy Daniel, who led the team with 264 yards on the receiving end, and was a threat in some other aspects. He was my A the year I was coaching freshman ball, and so obviously he had to make some strides to grow and be that starter by his senior year. Defensively, shout out to Cole Knorr and Tyler Vale, who are getting down and dirty in the trenches and racking up over 40 tackles. Cole also being a 4-year starter on the varsity level, getting snaps as a freshman at fullback and guard. And then you had Daniel Sandoval lead the team in interceptions as well as returns. So a decent amount of contributors leaving to graduation. Once again, shout out to my guys and my very first ever coaching experience, and shout out to the staff that was there. Shout out to Coach Renoff, as well as Coach Dietrich, being some of my first resources and introduction to coaching, and they continue to carry that on over at Wellington High School. So just wanted to give those guys a shout out and just be a little sentimental on this segment here regarding Greeley West. But back to looking ahead again, they do return Tegan Becker, I want to say, or Tegan Beecher, who will probably be the lead running back, and also Cortez Olbexson, who is on a handful of return duties. So I think that he'll get a ton of touches on offense, and then was second on returners for 27 total tackles. And then you also bring back Jed Hicks, who is a solid contributor on both sides, but no like all-state caliber talent seemingly on this team that is returning. And so they start off the season very, very tough against Montrose. Woof. That's a tough game to start the season off with. I think that Montrose wins this one. They then play at Gateway. I think that this is a winnable game, all things considered. Then they go at Northridge versus Meade. I don't think that they win these games, so they're looking at best a 1-3 start here. They then have Silver Creek, Monarch, Loveland, and Frederick here in their league. I think that the only team that looks beatable for this team here is probably Silver Creek, and even then, that is a little iffy. So I'm going to say a window of wins for the Spartans here. Obviously, there's 2 games that still are not on this max prep schedule. There's only 8, but if we based it kind of off the region or off of last season, but regardless, I still think that 0-2 window of wins is still very probable. I'll say 1-9 projected final finish. Keeping it north, but not as north, we're going to talk about Silver Creek and what they were able to accomplish last year. Look, I greatly overestimated this squad here as I gave them a window of wins of 5 to 8, as I thought that all the returning talent was going to be of great use to them. But that aged like milk as this team struggled despite having some playmakers going 3-7, with losses in the opening games like 43-35 at Prairie View and Golden 42-13. And then won over Boulder before losing big to Frederick. They then bounced back by berating Greeley West, but then went 0-2 in Longmont contests and dropped to Erie, as well as a 7-point loss to Greeley Central before stealing a win over Monarch to close the season 27-24. Now, what blows my mind is how many senior contributors they had, like star running back Cole Rogers, who ran for over 1,000 yards and 15 scores and was somebody who could catch out of the backfield, ranking 3rd on the team in receptions. The other 3 senior pass catchers in Russell Meinke, Steele Beckfar, and Bubba Fisk combined for over 900 yards, with Beckfar leading the pack at 5 scores. Throwing passes was Eli Moores, who went for 1,381 yards and 11 TDs to 8 interceptions. Defensively, a lot of those athletes were high impact as well. Rogers notching 2 interceptions, Meinke leading the team with 3 interceptions, and only finishing behind Beckfar for seniors in tackles. Beckfar notching 70, by the way, and Fisk behind Meinke with 46 of his own. You also graduate Finley, Carr, and Levi Walker, who were getting it done in the backfield of the offense, combining for 9 TFLs and 7 sacks, terrorizing the opposition. So a ton of class of 24 guys that are graduating, but that was still not enough for this team as they continue to lose games. But some of the guys that hopefully learn from those losses and hope to bring back some quality play are the likes of Ibrahim Kabor here, who looks like the stud of the defense, coming back after an 88-tackle season, where he also notched a couple of sacks. You also return David Tan, who's the next player on the tackle list, who comes back after getting 21 solo stops and 2 picks. Jackson Coleman made the watch list at edge and will look to pick up some of the production that he left behind, but ultimately hard to find a ton of other high-impact guys coming back. So let's go ahead and turn our sights to the schedule here as they face Skyline at home. This game could go either way. I'm going to talk about Skyline up here next. Now, I do think that Skyline has a more interesting ceiling, but both these teams are... This is probably going to be decided by a touchdown or less, if I had to guess here. So, moving along, they then play Boulder on the road. I think that is a game that they can win. Versus Longmont, I think that's a game they lose. I don't think that they beat Bear Creek. I think that they could lose to Riverdale Ridge as well. So they could go on a 3-game skid before playing Greeley West. I think that they should probably win that game. And then at Frederick, at Loveland, at Pooter, at Monarch. Do they really play 4 league games on the road? That's nuts. I think that they probably lose all 4 of those too, especially if they're all on the road. That's brutal. I think on the high end of things, you beat Skyline, you beat Greeley West, and maybe you beat Pooter or Monarch in an upset, but this is going to be a long season. I think that they do win at least 1 game. I don't think that they go winless here, or maybe even 2 games. I'm going to say a window of wins of 1-4. That's kind of a big window, and a final projected record of 2-8. Obviously, I want any team to prove me wrong, but like I said, just hard to find contributors who are coming back, and this team struggled with a lot of returning starters last year, so I wonder if there's something else going on that is just going to put a low ceiling on this squad. Now, the last team of this league is going to be the league favorite, in my opinion, and that is Loveland. I gave them a window of wins of 5-7, and they hit the ceiling on that, going 7-3, beating Fossil Ridge against my prediction, and then beating Pomona before dropping an absolute stunner to Thompson Valley that I'm not sure anybody saw coming. That was insanely historic, so that's where my wash goes on that. They then took out their frustrations from that loss on Greeley Central before losing a 2-score game to eventual state champs Erie. They'd win the rest of their games with an exception to Windsor before making the postseason and beating Bear Creek at home, and then having their season end in Southern Colorado against Mesa Ridge in kind of a brutal way. This is a very talented team. This is a very athletic team here, and that's going to be evidenced by their graduated seniors, such as Trey Olson, incredible athlete for the Red Wolves, who I believe is off just a little bit north to Wyoming now, following a senior season that saw him run for over 1,400 yards and 18 scores. But his versatility was truly valuable in every single sense of the word, as he also was the leading receiver in catches, yards, and touchdowns with 26, 456, and 6-score stat line here. He also had another versatile player. He also made plays on the defensive side of the ball, but to talk about, his fellow kind of top teammate, I would say, as far as impact go, that was Caden Stansberry here, who ran for half of 1,000 himself and 6 scores, not to mention the damage on defense. Caden being more of a defensive player, 116 tackles and 23 for loss. Olson, like I said, made contributions both ways, 55 tackles and a team-high 6 pass breakups. They also graduate Jedrick Jurjevec here, who had 60 tackles himself for this squad his senior season, and then Riley Lapone here, who wasn't high volume in his 6 games, but almost had a TFL in all of those appearances. Now, looking at some returning playmakers here, you bring back Ryder Easton here under center, presenting the same threats and being the same kind of typical dual threat we've come to expect from Loveland quarterbacks, running for 581 yards, but passing for 928 and having 15 total touchdowns on the season. I expect him to take a big leap forward in both production and scoring. They also bring back Zane D'Souza here, who comes in as one of the most interesting prospects in the class of 25, standing in at 6'6" and coming in off a 330-yard season, and no one else in sight to really target. I think that he could see an uptick in production with the obvious size advantage that he presents. While I am curious to always see what Loveland does to advance or maintain offensively, this defense year in and year out remains interesting, and that'll be the case as they return 3 of their top 4 tacklers and 6 of their top 9. This is headlined by returning linebacker Sim Long, who is second on the squad at 96 tackles and 7 for loss. You also have sophomore sensation Chadwick, who makes a return to the fold, and watchlist edge rusher Cody Moore, who had plenty of tackles in the backfield last season. This front 7 will be versatile, fast, and violent. And then you also, in the secondary, have Carter Butler here, or at least in the pass defense, who led the squad in interceptions at 3. With his returner duties, I'm assuming he will also be asked to do more, playing both ways for this squad and catch some passes here. So, all of that in mind, that's a ton of returning talent. Obviously, the high-end talent that you're losing on defense, not ideal, but I think that this Loveland coaching staff is one of the more competent ones in Colorado. I think that they scheme their players for success, and I think that defensively, they find ways to exploit weaknesses of their offense and force them to play with their left hand, more or less. Now, they start off this schedule in an interesting way, going all the way down south to Pueblo West. This will be a very good test in the very first week of the season here. A game that I think they could win, but I also kind of like Pueblo West odds at home to steal that, and they play typically pretty well in that opening week here. So I'm going to give the edge to Pueblo West in this opening game before they play Fossil Ridge. They've had Fossil Ridge's number the past few years, and I think that that could continue. If Fossil Ridge did win, I would not hold it against Loveland. I think that these teams are both pretty even as far as the gap that Loveland makes up for in coaching and Fossil Ridge kind of has in talent. So I think that they could probably start off 1-1 here. If they do start off 0-2, it is not time to panic, as I do think that they win these next 3 games in a row to at least have a winning record heading into league. This first game versus Frederick should be interesting, but I do think that Loveland's play style kind of favors them in this game to get the win, and I don't really see them struggling in their league here. Monarch, Silver Creek, Greeley West, Pooter, I think that they go 5-0 in league. At worst, they go 4-1. So I think that the lower portion of this season, I think that they win 7 games. I think on the upper end, they go 9-1. I think that they probably just lose one of these games against one of these heavyweights here. So window of wins of 7-9 and overall record of 9-1 for the Loveland Red Wolves. I'm usually pretty high on this team, and they have not let me down yet as far as predictions and projections go. So I'm going to just keep it rolling here and have faith in this squad, despite some new faces in some new places. All right, and this last team, not a super crazy long segment for you here at the end, as we have the Skyline Falcons here. Look, last year, unfortunately, this squad finished below my window of wins, where I thought they might have been able to ride stud running back Rah Carson to a few wins, but they narrowly nabbed just one victory during this campaign in a thrilling 29-26 win over Silver Creek, but unfortunately were just a sieve on defense, allowing 38.4 points per game, and didn't play a loss particularly close until the last 2 of the season, where they lost a couple of heartbreakers to Grand Junction Central and Greeley Central by a cumulative 4 points. Now, that's not to say that they didn't have some good contributors from their class of 24. Like I said, Carson, he still churned out a solid season, rushing for 854 yards and catching for another 177 for a 1,000-yard scrimmage season, and found the end zone 7 times. They do lead losing receiver Andy Rico, 22 receptions, 272 yards, 2 touchdowns across the stage. Gentry Swanson had over 1,000 yards combined through the air and ground and through 7 scores, but also struggled throwing 7 picks. Trent Howell and Brody Wiltshire led the team in tackles, combining for over 100. Wiltshire here getting 8 TFLs. And then you also had Grayson Gomez, who is second in the TFL department at 7. And as far as returning playmakers go, some of this is definitely some speculation. I'm going to say that, but I took a look at the film here, and I am partially intrigued here as he was named the starter against Greeley Central. That is sophomore Servando Morales here. He had some decent looks and led the team to 20 points at quarterback, while also registering some quality snaps on defense as well. He also had some nice runs against Longmont, and I think provides the Falcons someone to develop for the next 2 years, his junior and senior year. He's a good athlete. You could develop kind of a dual threat action with him. I think that his throwing is still just a little bit raw, and it's going to be interesting to coach as he is left-handed here. But he was a solid athlete on both sides of the ball last year for the Falcons, so I don't see why he can't still be a high-impact guy here. Now, also returning, you have Brian Hudson and Miley Davis, the 2 leading receivers who returned to the fold, who could develop some chemistry with Morales here. And Brian Hudson was somebody who made the watch list, leading his team in defensive playmaking on 2 INTs, 3 pass deflections, 2 fumble recoveries, and a blocked field goal. Ultimately, though, I feel like this Falcons team is probably going to be trending towards a rebuild season here that should hopefully yield some better results 2 seasons from now. Their first game is at Silver Creek. I said in the Silver Creek session that this game could go either way, but I am favoring Silver Creek. They then have a game versus Bear Creek at home. I don't think that they win that one. They then have at Frederick, that is probably a loss, and at Pueblo South, that I unfortunately think is a loss. At Stanley Lake versus Riverdale Ridge versus Grand Junction Central, at Longmont, at Adams City versus Broomfield. Woof. This is going to be a long season, I think, for Skyline. Unfortunately, I think that if they pull off like an upset or 2, maybe against Pueblo South or Stanley Lake, and then they win at home versus Grand Junction Central just because of the travel time, and then beat Adams City, I think the best case scenario here is probably 3 wins. But if they're not careful, they could end up with just 1 win here, probably against Adams City. If they lose that one, then there is no rebuild to look forward to next year. But I think that this team ultimately has a window of wins of 1-3, and I am going to project them, unfortunately, to go 1-9 here. But with a potential win looming with Grand Junction Central at home, and potentially upsetting the likes of South or Stanley Lake on the road. But I just don't quite see it here for Skyline. And that is going to do it for this episode of the Playmakers Corner podcast. Be sure to listen to prior previews that Coach V has accomplished, as well as myself, to learn about other teams 1A through 5A here in Colorado 11-man football here. And be sure to, listen to these episodes, whether you're listening on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We also upload to YouTube, so go ahead and find us on there. Make sure that you are subscribing to any of those, following us on any of those, and turning on your notifications in your settings to get notified whenever it comes out. You could also find out whenever we drop new episodes via social media on Instagram at Playmakers Corner, on Twitter at Playmaker Corner, as well as on our Facebook, Playmakers Corner, or TikTok at Playmakers Corner. All of those places will also have a ton of extra content for you to look at that's not our long-form audio content. So thank you for checking all of those resources out. I have been your host for this episode, Kodey Stauffer, signing off.